Well, welcome everybody. Really appreciate somebody come back. We have your attention. We'll get started. My name is Michael Lucchese. I'm the Executive Director of Urban Land Institute, Colorado. And we are very delighted to have been invited into Central City to do one of our technical advisory panels. We've done about 60 of these around the state. The key word in these is advisory. No one here is telling you what to do, but I can tell you that these folks all really know what they're talking about, and they are people who have volunteered their time for the betterment of your community, and that's what the TAPS, Technical Advisory Program, is all about. So we really are grateful to be here. I, as a non-gambling person, have not spent a lot of time in Central City before, but I'm really into old buildings. I used to actually work for the National Trust for Historic Preservation. So, and I can tell you got a real gem here. It's just an amazing place. It's one of the more intact historic districts I've seen in Colorado, or maybe in a lot of places in the U.S. So I think as that is a base asset, you have an incredible thing to build on. I want to thank my colleague, Mary Epping. She actually runs these programs for us. She does a great job. And she has kind of whipped everybody into shape here, and she'll be writing a report. So if you walk away wondering what's next from today's presentation, you'll get this report in about a month. It'll be a great document you can share with people who weren't here today. And I really want to thank Ray Rears, Mayor Jeremy, incoming Mayor Jeremy Fay, and lots of other people whose names I haven't written down. Maybe Marion can backfill a little bit of that. But the community has really been very supportive of this exercise. And yesterday I sat in through the stakeholder interviews, and we have almost, even in much bigger places, never had so many people show up for stakeholder interviews with such enthusiasm. So again, thank you all. Thank you really for our panelists. They gave a lot of their working time to do this. Marianne, and Marianne, if you can take away with anything I may have left out, we can get started.
Sure. Well, thank you. And I just want to second the thanks to the City of Central City for bringing us in. The Urban Land Institute is a global nonprofit, and we work for the Colorado chapter. And with that, we do advisory services all around the state, and the TAPS program is part of that. So we bring in volunteer ULI members to come into communities that have a challenge, and we try to help solve those challenges. In a day and a half, which really isn't very much time. We put this presentation together basically this morning. So it's all, these are all basically a brainstorm, and we'll try and solidify these ideas for you in the report that will come out after this happens. So thank you for being here and for being part of the stakeholder interviews if you were here yesterday. That was really fantastic. And I would like to introduce our panelists, and actually they'll introduce themselves, starting with our panel chair, Bill Campion.
Hello, Bill Campion with a firm called ETJ Design. We're an architecture planning and landscape architecture firm. We also do a lot of theming and branding design. We work on an international scale and do a lot of work in mountain resort communities. And so I'm really excited to bring kind of this idea about brand and vision as part of kind of what I'm playing a role here for, and talk about that. We just also add, we do this for a living a lot, and this whole group really, we really appreciate the amount of energy that has come to us and the feedback we've gotten and the input, and it's on your all's own time, right? So that's a big deal for us, and I just want to say I'm really thankful for that because it helped us do our job here today.
I'm Bill Parkhill. I'm a managing member of Tributary Real Estate. We're a real estate developer in downtown Denver. We specialize in urban infill projects, focused in the core areas of Lodo, Ballpark, and Rhino neighborhoods in downtown Denver. Currently, I'm working on everything from a $2.5 million adapter we use for the little Bill Truss warehouse building to $78 million office building that we're breaking ground on January 4th. So kind of across the spectrum in the historic district of new buildings and old buildings, and I think a lot of that background is applicable to this.
Good afternoon, I'm Wayne King. I'm with King Commercial Real Estate. I'm a commercial broker in Denver, been a broker for about 21 years. I focus on infill development and repurposing of properties, and I'm here to talk a little bit about kickstarting with retail and commercial on Main Street and housing needs.
Good afternoon, I'm David Triba, founder of Triba Architects. For the past 30 years, we've been redeveloping historic properties in Denver, and throughout the state of Colorado, including projects that you'd be well familiar with, like the redevelopment of Denver Union Station, the Denver Botanic Gardens, and creation of the new Colorado History Museum. In addition to our public work, we do quite a bit of private and commercial work. We've developed over 10,000 units of infill housing in sensitive historic sites, and we're very pleased to be here today, and I'm pleased to be here and look forward to the conversation after our presentation.
I'm Sam Sharp with D.A. Davidson and Company, an investment bank down in Denver. I've been a banker there for the last 20 years, focusing on special district and tax increment finance. So that's helping special districts like the BID here, or Urban Renewal Authority or Downtown Development Authorities, raise capital for infrastructure to meet whatever that community's needs are. And I'll tell you, we do about $1 billion in business a year. We've been doing that for 20 years. We put capital into almost every community in the state, and it's exciting to be able to do that in a community like this that is so tied to the history of our state. I'm a very proud Coloradoan, and being a part of keeping this city alive and helping it thrive in the future feels like a great way to deploy our collective expertise. So I appreciate the opportunity.
So, I won't thank every person individually, although we could, but what this slide really speaks to in my mind is such an invested group of people in your community. And so, huge group that we talked to. I wish we could have had an hour and a half with each one of y'all. We ended up getting, some of you ended up being with us probably longer than you wanted to. But I think this just really talks to the amount of involvement, the amount of, kind of sub-communities care for this place. And we were really, again, appreciative of getting that feedback. So this is interesting. We always start these things with a problem statement, which is kind of the ground basis for how we go about this. And one of the main primary issues was this idea of downtown vacancy. The 54% rate. If you investigate even more, we'll talk about this. It's actually even higher. If you really count all floors and non-conditioned space and all those kinds of pieces. And so it's a really interesting problem to have to solve. And then the next piece is really talks to the question about gaming's role in Central City. We acknowledge, I think everybody appreciates what gaming's done in terms of keeping the place alive, but I think Central City has to go beyond gaming in some ways too, and maybe go back to a little bit of what it was before and help tell that story. It includes gaming, but also includes a lot of the other great assets of this community. So the questions we were asked, and this is important to keep in mind because it has a lot to do with the output, right? So how do we get businesses and activity back in our downtown? How do we get more shops and uses that are non-gaming? Recognizing that we want year-round activity or year-round active community, and how can we realize this both in a short and long-term way? We don't, the question was not how in 20 years does this get solved. We'll talk more about why that's important in terms of kind of where the community is. All right, so this is what we discovered in terms of vacancy. Let's just focus on nearly 250,000 square feet. That's a big number, right? That's a big number in most any community, and that's commercial property. So I want everybody to digest this a little bit because it's really paramount to the rest of our discussion. The goal is to fill that up with vibrant, active, productive commercial uses. Just think about the number of people that have to support that, both tourists and people living here, and that'll be part of our conversation. So, what's a real town need? Well, a real town needs residents, right? We need people to be living here. We need people to be active. We need people on the street shopping. Those people apparently need places to live, so we need maybe some housing. We need the infrastructure to support that kind of situation, so it needs to be upgraded and taken care of. And they need, people who live in a place need multiple things to do, right? So this is really simple thoughts, but I think we'll get into a lot of detail on what these are in a minute. But it's really important to just really acknowledge this what we're calling facts. We're not even calling them kind of opportunities or chances. These are facts, right? We have to understand as a base level, we have to have people here, and we'll talk more about that. This is interesting. We had these quotes that actually, these are not our quotes, these are your quotes. We're desperate. We actually recorded these 4 times yesterday. That's a pretty interesting word. These are desperate times. and no city can remain frozen in time. So those are kind of two things that I think are important. Again, foundationally, and that's why we're starting with this, about to think about as we move forward, right? The idea of a historic place is not that it's frozen in time, not that it's a freeze-dried packaged element, but that it builds upon that foundation and still and cherishes what it has to grow. And we'll talk about what that means. So, you know, kind of again to talk a little more in detail about what we heard. The truth is, what we heard is the community does not support or has not supported development, right? Not only was there a moratorium, but also things development needs, whether it's parking or whatever, were turned down. So let's just call it what it is. There's a reputation, and I think that's important because you have to acknowledge that. There's a bit of a fear of change that we're hearing. You know, change is scary and difficult, and if you love and cherish a place as much as this place is loved and cherished, it's hard to imagine it changing, and how can we do that well? The idea about predictability in the development process being very minimal. We have to come back to, if we want anything to grow, develop, and change, we have to be predictable, because that's, minimizing risk, if you have to talk to developers, is the first thing we'll ask about. So how do we do that? And then this idea of parking, this kind of fundamental layer of, we want to have businesses and people they need. We need to have the infrastructure, and that's as simple as having enough parking so that if the town's successful, casinos aren't successful. Like, we need to have it so both are successful. Enough parking that both can grow and build upon that. And so, opportunities, this historic fabric's really critical and key. Universally, no matter what kind of side of the street you're on, you believe in that. That was really universal. And that goes back to protecting these existing assets. Capturing visitors by leveraging, Blackhawk can be a partner here. We can use that economic engine here to help support our community. And then I think it's really important that there's an opportunity actually to partner with maybe the bondholders a bit. They are actually, when we talk to them, pretty engaged in the success of the city. So I think that's an important thing to acknowledge. So the other thing I think is important, the way we structure this, is there's no silver bullet here. If there's a silver bullet, it'd already be done. One of the things that I've used this year is more like silver buckshot. Is what we need here. We need, and to use sports analogies, I love sports. So instead of going up and trying to swing through the home run, which the Rockies tend to do a lot and aren't successful, let's get some base hits. Let's load the bases up and then get the grand slam. So let's make bite-sized chunks, action items that actually can be attained. And then eventually the home run will show up, because these things build upon momentum and success. And so we've kind of broken this down into 4 areas of focus: the idea of vision and identity, the kind of real estate and activation, policy, financial. Then we'll have a summary at the end. So vision and identity, I'll talk mostly about this section. This idea of really creating a vision and identity that's universally believed and becomes like a religion here is really important. So. You even heard when there was a branding expert that kind of came in initially, they kind of got told about 2 different things, and eventually it didn't work out to even kind of move forward with the new brand idea, because there's some division in the community about who you want to be, and we'll talk kind of more about that. And whether it's family, whether it's gambling, whatever, how do we tie all that together? There's a huge, I can't overemphasize how much opportunity there is based. Most of the resort communities I work in don't have the history, and don't have this, kind of, this is called raw beauty of place. And so there's a lot of opportunities around that. There's a lot of opportunities around kind of this proximity to major kind of center of Denver. You could actually live here, for example, and commute down to the Denver area to work. So there's these great opportunities in this community. So let me talk a little bit about this. I think we have to come to an idea where we start to tell a story. When I say we, Central City, I'm starting to feel like it's we. It's authentic, our authentic story, but we're at risk of losing what I hear that so many people tie their story to, right? So there's the richest square mile on earth, right? I heard I think it's the first sentence on Wikipedia about this place, right? We're at risk of losing that story. You walk down the street, no one believes that story anymore. The story of place, the historic district, the place that is this community. We're going to lose that if it's falling apart, right? If you walk down the street right now and it's all empty, you're losing that story. So we have to acknowledge these things are being lost. If no one comes to performances, we start to lose that density, and this isn't a place of life, we're going to lose the story of music and performance. And then, at the end of the day, you know, when you see a street like this, you're losing your community, right? So let's acknowledge that base level is real for us, and that we're starting to lose the story that we hold so near and dear to us. And then, so how do we start to tell a new story? I think we have to think about our new story about, you know, thinking about the unsuccessful tourist. What's that mean? We have to, I asked somebody a question yesterday. Said, if I lined up every resident one-on-one and had a one-on-one interview, and I asked them, what's a successful tourist community look like, would I get the same answer? It's like, no, some people don't even know how to answer that. The truth is, successful tourist communities are really busy, and they have traffic, and they have congestion, but they have what we call happy congestion, right? Nobody wants to go to the restaurant when you can walk right in and get a seat. You want to wait in line because there's a sense of being around that action, right? And so we have to acknowledge we need this kind of congestion. We need to manage it so it's done well and it's right, but we can figure that out. We need an authentic story that can be captured in images. So this graph, which is probably a little bit hard to read, talks to tourism communities and how people make the decision about where they're going to go, right? So you're competing, let's acknowledge, we're competing on a national, if not international scale as a tourism destination. You have a lot of advantages over a lot of places, and maybe some disadvantages, but in this stat, what you're seeing here is the orange is social media response. So if I take a picture of me in a place, or say I went to a place, how important is people thumbs up at me, high-fiving me, give me a response on social media? And then here's what's really exciting for this place. The blue here is authentic experience, okay? And so even the millennial generation, or actually it's interesting, millennials talk a lot about authentic experiences. Over 50% of the portion of your decision about where you're going to go is based on having an authentic experience and going to an authentic place. All the way to, in the baby boom generation, 76%. So I think we can do really well there. We got such a great balance for that. The next thing is the social media response. We'll talk a little bit about Central City's social media presence, but next. So this is an interesting quote. Instagrammability is the most important factor for millennials choosing a destination, a tourism destination, right? So I call it Instabrag, right? It's some way of promoting yourself out to the world of being better. So we'll talk about this. This is me Instagramming this morning and last night. I had a good stout here. Next. So here's Central City, Colorado's social media Instagram presence. 1,200 tags. Okay? Just to give you a sense, the fake Central City, which is from the Flash TV show, which is this image on Instagram currently, has 93,000. So interesting enough, the fake city has a lot more. But even other communities, just to give you a sense about places in the country that, you know, whether it's Montrose, Leadville, Salida, so not ski resorts necessarily, not major economies in the country. Look how many times people are tagging where they are and about compared to Central City. And what's really cool about the modern world is I can do analysis on success of your tourist brand in like 10 seconds by just getting on Instagram, right? And this is really important. So we have to be able to tell you, this is part of this is not telling a unified story, to be honest with you. So we'll get into maybe more about that. So I think the brand story has to evolve here. And when I say it has to evolve, it can't just be about the history of Central City. It has to be a living place. We have to make this be like it's a lot. Philadelphia, top 5 historic destinations in the United States. What do they use for their picture? Not Liberty Bell, right? Let's just acknowledge that there's new things happening in these communities, Boston, Philadelphia. And what they're talking about is what's coming on. They're building, what I would call this is building on the historic place, right? Pretty interesting. So this is kind of what I'm thinking about what this is. We have to develop a common story, right? Not 5 different stories. Not a casino story, not a historic preservation story, not a mining story, but a common story so that if I talk to somebody from historic preservation, they tell the exact same story that the person from the casino operator tells about this place. And it's not divided. And when we do that, it has to be about success. We have to talk, we need lines outside of our places, which means there's a lot of people in town. Right? We have to, these are pictures, these are of the 1,200, this is 2, so it's what is that, you know, some percentage of people taking pictures of the downtown. What's interesting is cars are really important here, so we'll talk about that. You know, people who perform. Opera, but what's the next thing, right? What's the love sculpture here? This is a parking lot and lawn lot, right? So you can do anything and anywhere. You can have snowboarding competitions in a parking lot. People who create and learn, we'll talk more about that in the next pieces of how that can add to the story here. People who drive, this is already existing. Why not continue to build upon that? At least 50% of Instagram posts were about cars, which is kind of interesting to me. People who dance. So the idea, this is, dancing's it's a kinetic place, right? It's not a stagnant place. And people who live here, I can't emphasize this enough. We need people to be living in this community, to be shopping, to make any of this viable, right? And so all I would ask is that let's keep this story in mind, because all the things we're going to talk about here is if we believe in these ideas, is what you have to do to get there. So this is the common word being people again. We need some people, right? Whether they're driving up or living here, preferably both. And probably a much bigger quantity than we have today. And then, as part of that, and when we sell our brand and vision, we have to be able to start talking outside of policy and words and horizontal description. Let's start talking about what things could look like here. And one of the things we're going to recommend is part of what we're calling a business plan, not a comp plan, a business plan, which means it has financial returns for both the town and the business owners, is to start talking about what could this place look like? What are we doing to create the next Instagram picture? And let's tell that story, and then let's go get it built, right? Whether that comes from development dollars or not. And this is something that can happen. This came out of a study, right? And then we implemented it the very next year. And now there's, it's packed with people. Who knew? All right, next. All right, so we're going to get into the next piece.
So now that we talked about story and we sort of get a sense of who we are, we want to start to turn that into action, and we want to start to think about how do we make forward progress. We looked at some of the issues, and I think one of the most important points on this slide is actually this bullet point here, this point. It wasn't that it was in any hierarchy, but as developers look at this, whether they're casino developers or retail developers, they're looking at risk and they're looking at reward. And when there's too much risk and there's not enough reward, nothing happens. And so one of the things that we have thought about is how do we start to de-risk ideas and create a better opportunity for reward. And some of those challenges right now is the fact that there's a lot of vacant space. They're held by two property owners and nothing is happening. And so when people come and look at this, it looks very risky, right? There's a lot of vacancy that's sterile. And how do we activate that? Historically, everybody in the state knows this town has not been supportive of development. We may think we are, but we're not. And that's kind of been come to the surface on a variety of things, from moratoriums to regulations to whatever. So that's another piece. And then I think there's a fear of change that's been underlying in some of the conversations that we had yesterday, that it's hard. Change is going to change who we live with, the people that are going to be here, and those kind of things. And then lastly, it keeps coming up that lack of parking, and that's kind of the chicken and the egg thing. You can't have an active and crowded street without parking, but you just can't go build parking and expect the crowd to come. So these are these things. There are a lot of opportunities here, and we think in order to put people into this city, we need to build housing. And that housing has a lot of options. We've got mixed-use opportunities above some of the retail we have. Potential off-site or up on the hill, Mammoth Hill, those kind of things. We have a lot of opportunities here. But the other thing, and we talked about this with the city, is how do we make the development process easier? And the city staff has been doing a good job of trying to figure out how to get into use by right and some of those kind of issues, but nobody knows that. So the old hangover perception that it's a very difficult process still exists. Again, we need to add parking, and then lastly, we need to figure out a way to really convince some of these landowners to be equity stakeholders, not just in the building and the capital stack, but also in the better community. So the tendency of, when you bring in consultants and you all do a study, everybody thinks about a silver bullet, and Bill mentioned that a few minutes ago. We think that while there's no silver bullet, there's no one big idea that's just going to be a game changer. There really is a series of singles. And so what the series of singles starts to do also is it starts to de-risk the community. We're starting to see little tiny actions start to take away risks. They're starting to put people in there. So we looked at what can we do to start doing some little actions that don't cost very much, that the city might have some money in the general fund or the historic fund for winterizing some of the opera cottages, getting them for year-round use, and having those cottages available in a variety of formats, whether they're students or they're Airbnb or whatever, but having that and Eureka Street activated. So, no, this one. Well, let me just go back over. So as we start to hit singles conceptually, what we want to do is we talked about, that's when we start to think about a long haul. We like sports here. But we're thinking, that's when we start thinking about the key lot, or that's when we start thinking about conference or hotel or music venues or whatever. So those things are really going to be phase two. A couple of things that we have, we talked a lot about music, and we talked about how to activate with music. We already have a venue. It's not ready for the winter, but it's 550 seats. Let's get one of the short, easy solutions with a beautiful venue is to upgrade the heat and be able to use that immediately and have that as a venue. And the cottages are easily upgraded for that year-round activation. So there's a variety of cottages on Eureka, and we're going to talk a little bit more with regards to some of the student activation, but these things are prime for bringing in some temporary residents. David, do you want to talk about the apprentice program a little bit?
I will. We've begun conversations over the last several months with the University of Colorado and Metro State University in their City Center program, and have had recent conversations even this week that started on Monday with many of you in the room to talk about the beginning of some specific programs that will allow the university to fill in the 9 months that the opera is not in residence with students, graduate students and faculty, as well as an artist in residence program that could include music, historic preservationists, and other artists. This is a real program that is very active throughout the state of Colorado, and the university is very excited about continuing and to codifying an agreement to be up here during the other 9 months with faculty and students. The idea that, much like Habitat for Humanity, these students could do small projects and make a real difference in a real place.
Basically slave labor.
You know, I think, I'll talk to this just super quickly here. I mean, we're talking a lot about housing right now. We're going to get into a lot of the commercial activation. But we have to realize, when we talk about those numbers, right, we have a retail and commercial use that has to have customers. So we need to develop that. We need places to live. The real gift here, honestly, is you have a massive regional industry. Just so you all know, the number of employees in Blackhawk, Central City, and gambling is way higher than a ski resort, number of employees. So it's actually a huge economic base. They're starting gold mining again. They're going to do the zip line. So some of this business is going to happen. We ought to be having people living here that are working here. And so we're super lucky in a lot of ways. We have a great regional industry that we ought to be providing housing and pulling these people. In every other mountain resort community, we're pulling people. They're desperate to get people to live there who are working there. Here, it's actually possible to do it in an affordable way. So we're quite lucky. And at the end of the day, that's what's going to create a real authentic community, is having people like yourselves, honestly, who are super invested here because they live here.
So within the first 2 years, we can go from the existing 700 residents that we have that expands a little bit in the summertime with 150 to 200 people that come to live here for the opera, support the opera. We could do that year round, which would allow someone who wanted to open up a coffee shop or a breakfast place or a sandwich place to serve the 20,000 people that come during that 3-month period, which would now, if you expand 20,000 people from those 6 or 8 weeks in the summertime, you're talking about nearly 1 million people coming because of the activity of those artists in residence and those programs that are happening in the existing facilities that we have currently. So we're beginning to build an economy that can stand on its own and have a real business plan with focusing on our most important assets, which are the historic structures, and getting them in first-rate order first and now. Imagine when we're talking about housing going from 700 to 1,000 within 1 to 2 years, and then focusing that 2-year period on creating relationships with developers so that we could begin to serve the need for 2,000 to 2,500 today of the service workers in the industry in this neighborhood. Imagine if we began to build housing. We'd all of a sudden in 5 to 10 years we would have a stable population of about 3,000 that would then allow us to have a grocery store. It would allow us to have more restaurants and a more normalized economy where we could have predictable income and predictable life on the street to support a real town.
So I think a couple of other ideas that we've got is, again, trying to find quick wins, trying to find easy solutions to create this viability. And a couple of those are, you've got some streets and alleys that are not very active. Pine Street is an example, perhaps, where, you know, maybe if we did a mobility plan, we can figure out how do we activate the streets in some of these off times or niches in the vacant lots of those areas. So seasonal seating. So, and then also talking about programming and full-time active use in terms of arts and culture, music. And one of the things we heard last night was potential 1,600 seat venue for music. We've got a 1,600 seat venue for music on the street. So we just need to figure out how do we find time to program that, use that as our first and initial win. And then other little pieces that help create that environment, easy answers are county pocket parks. There's several vacant lots along in here. They're full of weeds and it's very easy plantings, create a little sense of place. Can be part of that whole street scene. So that those are real simple things to accomplish.
And then I'm going to step in and I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of kickstarting this idea. And I know it from the standpoint of the larger questions and some of the businesses, the casino business and operation, some of what we're talking about seems to be missing the point. I don't want to go too far out, but it seems to me that we're really just talking about the vacancy that you're experiencing right now and how do we try and change that in the first year or two, and how do we try and change it in year 2 to 4. And we want the casinos to continue to thrive and to continue to grow and get away from this notion that these two ideas compete with each other. There will be times when they do feel like they're too intense, but I'd like to start with the idea that you've spent this fantastic amount of money on a fantastic highway that is underperforming as far as serving your community. You have 900,000 cars a year come over it, and you're saying roughly 50,000 or 50% of those actually stop and stay in the community. That's a fraction of what comes up the Highway 6 and spills into the Blackhawk and into your community. So we want to think about short, quick, simple things that you can do that say you've arrived in a place. You have a over the street banner about coming up to Central City when you first get on the Parkway, but 8 miles later, it's very hard to determine that you're coming into a little town. And so there's one way to do it is put a big monument sign there and cover the street. That hasn't been a popular idea. Or you could actually teach people to think about the highway. So do events on the highway that would include bike races, running races, classic car events, motorcycle events, even speed racing events that try and get the motivation to say, hey, this is an 8-mile road and it's got a lot of fun dynamic to it. It's got a steeper terrain, you can't really bring buses across it. So you've got to make people think that there's a place you're going to, so you end everything right in downtown. Stop them there and create that activity there. And then when you do that, you'll be able to take that opportunity and build in the little storefronts and shops and things that you would like to see in the buildings that are vacant right now, and build them into the idea of a longer term shop. So if you can get a food truck or a series of food trucks that park in front of the vacant buildings when the casinos are slow, when they're busy, then you're going to draw people down the street a little bit, and get them down a little bit further, and if there's an event there, even better. It could be street performers, it could be a live jazz venue or a music venue in the street. Then when the casinos are slower, you might park a food truck in front of the casinos or between the casinos to draw the people out to the street. We wanted to sort of create this idea that we're getting comments from the smaller business in town that they're saying, we're really about recreation, arts, culture, history. We really have visitors that stay a night or two. They go and gamble for a period of time, but then they don't have anything else to do. And they'd like to stay maybe longer. So we're thinking in terms of small, little, tiny events that are from 2 to 4 hours that kind of pair with the gaming process, so that if people have family members that don't gamble, that they can go and do something during that time frame, and then sort of broaden that into a 1 and 2 day time frame where they stay longer and there's more to see and more to do, and there's more interaction with the gaming as well. So bringing more visit, or making it a place, is sort of going back to this idea about people. You have a rich history of people, and we need to get the whole community to talk about the brand, talk about the things that you're here up for, and then talk about the people that were here before and currently people that are influencing the community. So if you can bring more visibility to the founding supporters of the Opera House, for example, or even the past performers, or even the current supporters of the Opera House, and do it in a little quick podcast or some kind of a video cast, and promote it in a way like Instagram, that it becomes little short clips that all your staff, all your people in town can talk to the people that come into the city about the personality that exists here. Try and get away from the vacant buildings, to the history of the vacant buildings, and put live history into it. If I go to the gambling halls and I've never had anyone say, hey, do you know the Teller House history? Do you know somebody about the Teller House? There's some fantastic boards that are sitting inside the Opera House stable that are fascinating about who's performed here. Can we get those inside the vacant buildings and get people, as they're walking around doing things, to say, oh wow, I didn't know so-and-so was here, and I didn't realize that was a part of this culture. So we want to push those ideas, and we really like the idea of the students coming up here, because two things: it can help train your current employment staff to think beyond their current job and get them involved, and it also creates a microcosm of labor that can help do these little pilot projects. These little small coffee shops may be supported by some of the students that are doing work up here. And so we want to kind of build this notion that the free labor is a great idea, but it also brings education up to an area that is stagnant in its growth, in the professional growth for the community.
It wasn't free, it was a slave.
Oh, so I'm sorry, slave, yeah. I was kinder and gentler. And then you could do simple things with these vacant buildings. You could reach out to photographers and encourage them to do photo shoots and things like that then get posted to your website, get posted on Instagram, get people to say, wow, that's a really cool interior of a building that's just sitting vacant. You have a lot of space there. So go on to the next one if you would. Then on the retail and entertainment piece, we have the guide for the future startup business. You've already got the elements there. You've got the menagerie, you've got the Photoshop, you've got the zip line and the train, and you've had things start and fail. That probably won't change in the short run. What we want to do is we want to put some legs under it, and we want to give you some ideas about partnering with the owners of the building to be willing to build out the smaller spaces where the city can maybe provide a backstop of incentives to create a predictable rent return. So right now, we were looking at the expenses of carrying these vacant buildings, and in truth, it is not that much different than some of the buildings downtown that have a triple net. So the expenses of the utilities, water, the sewer, a vacant building is a vacant building. Some areas, you know, in town it's $8, $9 a foot. And what we're trying to say is that may even be too much for a small business to pay. It might be too hard to get that started now. Let's figure out a way that the city can help prop that up, support it through different programs, and then make a predictable return for the property owners so that they see a path to actually charging rent and getting these big spaces cut down. We also heard that the casinos are like a larger format, and the retail is the vacant buildings are too big. So we want to break that up, and we want to create mixed use. We want to push housing above it. We think that there's an opportunity to add something like 75 to 100 units, 150 units above these buildings that are vacant, and figure out a way to get that moving. So there's different resources for funding that can help out, funding of vacant property ordinance, the reduced fees or deferred fees and existing property owners can benefit from, or the tenants can benefit from. Execute your plan with the code enforcement, and we think that if you're going to talk about the casino's food and beverage as a competition to the street food and beverage, then maybe what we'd like to do is we'd like to encourage that the comp programs that are available for the casinos to write off food to their players be extended out into the community, so that you take away that sales tax on the casino food, and that conversation goes away, because that seemed like a big threat. So let's see, we also want to encourage that there's elements of the contractors consulting and help them meet the code with the students and the staff, leverage students for planning and design for the office and housing, and then create a need for contractor oversight. Yeah, well, the next side is really just moving to a regular rent, and I would recommend that you look at communities that have a shorter season than you and encourage them to look at the volume of people that come here and move their business into here as an extension of their current existence. So in Estes Park and in Lyons and in the Netherlands, you have communities with really cute, interesting, characteristic things. They drop off at the end of the winter season. You still have people coming here. Bring them over here and see if you can't get them to take larger spaces. You've got sports, you've got ice cream, you've got shops, photo shops. But we want to move towards specialty food, so you have to get to a rent rate. So there's a need for a high-touch approach to that. And then mixed use across the board is really just, now you're at a point where you're pretty close to getting regular rent, and now you're only filling in the areas that aren't performing, regular businesses are taking over. So I'll leave it at that. And
I'm gonna hop in here next on go to the next slide, please. Some of the things that also about activating, you know, I think there's some real simple ideas we can do here that are kind of create that love icon and use. I think one of the things you're gonna hear we're talking a lot about is reuse of space that's maybe underutilized, whether it's streets and putting some ping pong tables up in an area that doesn't ever get used. As simple as that to, go to the next one, to, you know, one of the things is don't put a sculpture in the middle of the road or in a roundabout. Put it in a place that you can go up and touch, like the blue one I showed earlier in Breck. That's a thing that you can interact with. It starts to become more interactive. Go next. You know, this idea has been brought up before in terms of like some kind of mining heritage element. Just to keep in mind how simple these ideas. If you know the Dancing Fountain in Aspen, that actually has its own website. Believe it or not, it's a super simple idea, but it's beloved. And so what we have in Central City that's kind of new and different and interactive, that's more engaged in a place that's maybe underutilized in some of these outlots streets. Okay, policy changes. So
I'm not a panelist. I actually work with ULI Colorado, but I'm going to talk a little bit about policy because I have a lot of background in policy and because I actually wrote a guidebook on how to reuse commercial vacant properties. And that guidebook includes a lot of policy tools. So I was kind of uniquely positioned to be working on this tab. And I was excited when Ray called me to ask us to come to Central City. So thank you. So some of the challenges with regard to the vacancy, there's no real code enforcement in this town because of limited staff capacity at the city level. So a lot of these properties are sitting vacant and deteriorating over time, and there's not much that the city has been able to do about that. So we're going to go ahead and recommend that they, in the near future, hire a code enforcement staff person to actually enforce the code that already exists, and that could actually help make a lot of headway in this town with the vacant properties. And then I'm gonna suggest a few other things that can go along with addressing the vacancy problem in the downtown. So, one of the tools that I wrote about in the guidebook and that's actually used around the country, usually not in Colorado because most towns in Colorado actually have strong demand for their vacant properties. Central City is kind of unique in that way. And I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, like another person in this room, and we have tons of vacant properties, so this is really relevant to a lot of cities and a lot of towns in other parts of the country. So some tool that you can learn from is called a vacant property registration ordinance. And how this works is that when a property has been vacant for a set amount of time, the city requires those property owners to register their vacant property with the city. And they provide information about their property to the city so that the city knows that it's vacant. And they also can, and usually they recommend that they pay a fee, an annual fee, depending on how long it's been vacant. So the way that that's set up, there's lots of examples from around the country, so you can set it up however you want. But what tends to work well is that it works with code enforcement, so they have to register their vacant property every year that it's vacant, and they have to pay the fee every year that it's vacant. And that fee can be put into a fund, which we would recommend would be like a revolving loan fund. And that fund can be used to provide property owners with funding to make improvements to their property. So it's both a carrot and a stick in terms of making sure that there's a financial cost to just sitting on a property and holding it vacant and letting it deteriorate. And then there's a reward for reusing their property. So they have access to funding to be able to improve their property, making it tenant ready or maybe doing facade improvements. There's lots of different ways that you can handle that. And if it's a revolving loan fund instead of a grant, that money will replenish itself so that the city will have more and more funds over time to help refurbish these properties, which is ultimately the goal. And I can stay in touch. I have examples and templates on how to do this. It's not that hard and really effective.
So we're, again, coming back to the process and the inherent risk and reward of that. You know, the process needs to be easier, and the staff has done a lot of work at making it use by right. So right now you can go straight to building permit for the most part in several land uses downtown. But one of the other impediments in the process is the soft cost, that early risk capital for some of the smaller developers. So there are tools, tap fee waive, building permit fee waivers, or something we can use. And then one of the other most important things is be open to integrating new ideas, new architecture into the old buildings. It's been very successful around the country. A good example of that is Lodo in Denver. You know that well. And allow more market-driven responses that meet today's standards and trends. So.
Just a few minutes here on the financial. I know we're already kind of over time on our presentation, so I'll try and keep that at the high level. Challenges that we definitely took from the dialogue and the research we've done is there's definitely a fairly high tax on the commercial property owners in the VID relative to the rest of the Central City community. Actually not very high relative to comparable redevelopment opportunities happening throughout the state. So that's one of the opportunities here is kind of reframe how we think about those taxes and how to use those taxes and how to deploy them rather than just staying there, the impediment to growth, and we can't do anything about it because we got the bonds and sitting in a cycle of kind of that negative spin. And another of the challenges certainly was the city relies almost entirely on gaming-related tax revenue. The city's revenues are growing, and that's great, but the concentration on a single industry is an absolute risk to any balance sheet for a municipality. So it's one of the things we looked at. Some opportunities we looked at, some additional public finance tools would include the creation of a DDA potential special district policy for new districts. BID was a way to finance the highway to support commercial development here. There are other opportunities for development around the city that are also going to need infrastructure. And so special districts are a way to do that. So that would be a new district for a new development where those taxpayers would pay for the roads that they use. It's a way to support. That's used throughout the metropolitan area and the Front Range. A lot of good policy statements you could look at from other cities to say. It's another way to make the development process easier. When someone comes into town and says, I want to develop the XYZ parcel in town, you can say, well, not only have we made it easier with all these tools that Bill talked about, but also we're open to you creating a district for your site so you can help pay for your own infrastructure. Partnering with the BID bondholders to invest in the BID to maximize value of their existing investment. I think this is a way down the road step. One of the things we heard from the bondholders is they are interested in the success of the city. They are one of the largest investors in your city with what they hold. They need to be convinced that they can trust the city process, that the strategic plan that's put in place, the business plan that's put in place has merit, is likely to work, has bite-sized steps that can be achieved over time. If that all happens, they have a $1.5 million receipt going to them a year right now, some portion of which could potentially be redeployed back into your community to help achieve the larger goal of everybody to raise all the votes. The other would be, oh, we already talked about the reframing. Next slide, thank you. And so, in thinking about how the city spends its money, and frankly even potentially the BID spends its money, we want to be really strategic about that. So we want to make sure if we're going to spend some of our historic funds, or we're going to be spending some of our general fund, are we spending it in the way that achieves our city goals long term? Is it better to spend $40,000 a year subsidizing 3 retailers on Main Street, so they have to pay nothing but the triple nets and no rent? Does that make more sense than it does to redevelop the Belvedere Theater, put all the money into one thing that may or may not have any impact? And I'm not saying I know the answer to this question, but you want to make sure when you're spending the money that those dollars you're looking at the impact and how it ties directly to your desired outcomes. Those outcomes, potentially, if we're talking about deploying those dollars to winterize the Opera House or the cottages, there may even be revenue that comes back from those, right? We winterize the Opera House, there's going to be a whole lot of box office revenue that comes from the Opera House. Some of that could go to pay the city back for the winterization. Right, this could be an investment rather than just a grant. Same could be true for the cottages. And I think that some of the things that both of the bills were talking about earlier with activating those empty lots, there are some very low cost things we can do in there, right? We could buy 3 outdoor ping pong tables for less than $5 grand and deploy those in the right season, and off you'd be with at least one little pocket park for $5,000. That would activate something. When someone walks down the street, they feel like there's something going on. They have some reason to stay here rather than drive right on through to Blackhawk. And you can spend very little money, I think, to do some of that. And so, and not only we're talking about the direct reinvestment, but the larger economic impact analysis. That what is it, having those 3 retailers in that example, active and open on the street, if that's what allows those Opera House events to occur year round, and that's what allows traffic to be here year round, we go from 20,000 to 1 million, that's what allows the sustainable retail long term. We've got an investment, very small investment in those retail